When we get closer to the inner child, or the inner child is more present, then the inner critic also starts to get more watchful. This dynamic between inner critic and inner child is very much where the inner critic is always monitoring whether or not you are living and being within the boundaries of what it thinks is okay, what's acceptable. Obviously, there's good reason for that. We have issues around safety. Our parents probably were concerned about our productivity or us being successful, being able to make it in the world. So there's all sorts of things, all sorts of messages that we've gotten around the inner child just being, because the inner child is very, in a way, wild, not tamed yet, not refined. But like we said all along, that will happen. But because it got shut down, it hasn't had the opportunity to be developed, to be mature. So that's the fear, right? So if you just let your inner child go, the fear is, oh, I'm just going to sit around and eat donuts and watch TV and not get up and be totally lazy, and I won't get anything done. And how's that going to work? Does that make sense? There's like a kind of inherent fear of the inner critic of, oh my God, like this kid inside is just going to be not responsible, totally at the whim of its desires, which is true. Like my son, he's 4, he wants everything. So it's not like really, not really rooted in reality. I was like, hey, dude, if you eat a bag of candy, that's not so good for you. But he doesn't care about that, right? He just is so in tune with the desire. He's just representing the desire. Inner child does not like responsibility, does not like adulting, just wants to have things be easy in a way, like not get in the way of fun. So there's some legitimate things that the inner critic has some concerns about. It's like, we can't have the inner child just run the show. Yeah. These two parts of ourselves are so central to our dynamic. You see how we create anxiety within the dynamic, depending on how harsh your inner critic is, how rigid, what kind of attitude it has. So is it a kind and loving, supportive parent, or is it fed up, has a lot of judgments about your inner child and fun and spontaneity? Okay, so we're trying to bridge the gap here between these two parts of ourselves. So what we want to do is create some dialogue between the inner critic and the child. And this is a kind of dialogue that you'll need to practice for a little bit before they can really start talking to each other. And one of the things that we want to look at in this dialogue is feelings. Okay. What kind of feelings does each side have? And there's different levels of feelings that we want to be aware of. So the inner critic, for example, when it's harsh or when it's criticizing, you might think that it's angry, right? That's one level. Oh, the inner critic's feeling angry. If we really stay with it and pay attention, your inner critic also might be feeling very scared. Scared that you're just going to waste your life, scared that you're just going to sit around all day. Like, how is it going to get stability and security? And how are you going to fulfill your potential? Or how are you going to survive if you're playing? But you see how all of these things are very black and white? But anytime that you go play and have a good time, you're going to waste your life, and there's going to be no stability, and there's not going to be any security, right? You see how we go black and white. The inner child can go black and white too. It's like, all I want to do is have fun. That's all there is to life. That's all I want to do. Right? Or I want to avoid. I just want to be comfortable. I don't want to go out and test myself, or I don't want to go out and expand. I just want to be comfortable and secure, right? These two parts need each other. So we're helping them establish a more realistic view of each other, but also of your life and what it means to function in your life. And you're going to run into situations where the inner critic goes, you should be doing this or that, or it's going to criticize you. All right, we stop and do a intervention, like a mediation. All right, so we ask the inner critic, all right, how are you feeling? What's going on? So it's important to get really clear about that. And we want to try to do that without judgment. The inner critic might go, oh, you're being lazy. Okay, that's like a straight up judgment. That's not a feeling, right? Okay, how are you really feeling about it? Okay, actually, I'm feeling frustrated, but I'm also feeling a little scared. I'm scared. If we're really honest, I'm scared. All right, and then we ask, what are you needing? The feelings always point to an underlying need. So we look at the feelings of the inner critic, we look at the needs of the inner critic. What is it pointing to? Okay, I'm needing some reassurance that we're actually going to do some work today, or we're going to get so and so things done off of our list so you don't get overwhelmed later. And then we go to the other side with the inner child, right? Okay, how does that actually make you feel? The inner child might have some feelings about that. Oh, I don't want to do that. I want to have fun. Okay. And I'm feeling really sad because we're just working all the time. Super boring. You never pay attention to me, right? We never get to do anything that I want to do. All we're doing is adult stuff, whatever it is. And then there's some need underneath. It could be need for stability also, need for attention, need for fun and joy. And so then these two parts can come up with a solution or a way for you to do that, which is always possible. Because if we're not operating from a black and white perspective, then it's always possible. You can always make a little time. Yeah, we have to work, but we can have time throughout the day to have a piece of candy, go out for a walk, go watch a little fun show, right? We'll set up and go to a class. We're giving space to both of these parts to get their needs met. And you are the mediator. So you get to be like, nope, inner critic, you can't be harsh like that. You can't name call. You set the rules. Same thing with the inner child. No, we can't just sit around and play video games all day. I'm sorry. That's not going to work. Okay. So what happens usually is that we swing and we become the inner critic or we become the inner child. And we swing back and forth. If I'm identified with the inner child and I have my own needs that aren't being seen, I want to go out and have fun. I want to go play basketball or I want to go do something and it can't, then it's like life is just all about work and nobody's having any fun. It's super boring. It's like dead, right? And then what happens is that we get into a cycle where the depression or the heaviness or the lack of motivation comes in. And the inner critic gets even more freaked out because, oh my God, now you're just sitting around. You should have been doing work. So that it just goes in a circle, right? So without any understanding and without dialogue between these two parts, you're just going to cycle through that all the time. And you can see how it probably works to a certain degree. Otherwise, you wouldn't have adopted it, this part that's going to whip me in shape so that I can get things done. But meanwhile, it's whipping you and hurting you. There's a lack of balance. So the inner critic has a certain kind of strategy to get what it needs from the total ecosystem of yourself, right? And so some of the inner critic strategies might include judgment and comparison. Oh, look at so-and-so. They're doing such a good job. It's like trying to motivate you, maybe. Like underneath the need is security or safety, responsibility, structure, maybe some predictability. It's trying to motivate you or trying to make sure that you get things done. If we look at it from the most non-judgmental standpoint, it's trying to help in some way. If we're very generous with the inner critic, it's trying to help us to live our life well, or for us to fulfill some kind of potential. So you can see how it's like a parent in that way, right? It's authoritative, has a kind of parental voice, it has power. So it's really important that we're also feeling the inner critic, feeling that energy, parental, authoritative, and then all the other things that come with it. Because there's lots of different kinds of parents. We could have loving and kind, supportive parents. We could have harsh coaches. We can have parents that have a lot of expectations. Maybe they're not mean, but there's a lot of expectations that they're setting. Or maybe they're abusive. So the issue is that the inner critic that we've developed has a kind of harshness to it. Or if it's not harshness, then it's rigidity. So there's no attunement to your inner child. Most of the time, I would say the inner critic develops to be more of a bully, like more of an abuser, even though it's trying to help. So the big picture is, yes, the inner critic is trying to help, but it does that in a way where it suppresses and tamps down the inner child. And we'll get into reasons for that later on. But for right now, we have to start seeing the dynamic. In a way, the inner child is a victim where it like wasn't allowed to just be there. Usually it's because the inner critic is going, you're too much, you don't have any value, you're too this or that, you can't really be in the picture, you're too annoying, you have too many feelings, all these things, right? So let's write down what the inner child needs. What does your inner child need? The inner child is a little interesting because a lot of times we're more in touch with the feelings and the desires and the wants of the inner child and less in touch with its strategies to try to get that. We want to look at that too. So on both sides, there's strategies. The inner critic might use judgment, might use evaluation, might use harshness, might use threats to try to get what it needs. And the inner child usually needs some kind of expression, space, fun, just being. Maybe it has a lot of energy that it wants to get out. Let's just take a moment to think, what does the inner child do to try to get those things? Is it sneaky? Does it tantrum? Does it ignore you? Does it just totally ignore the inner critic? Does it have some attitude? Does it get angry? Does she or he get depressed, sad, lifeless? Does it have that kind of, here I am, I need attention while you're trying to work? Does it pull on you while you're trying to get things done? I'm just naming all those things that my kids do. No. Does your inner child melt down? Does it throw a tantrum? Do they play helpless? Do they try to negotiate, make deals? So my guess is that most of the inner children here don't really get what they want or need. We don't make a specific effort or carve out specific time to either be with the inner child, or we cut them out of certain things in our life. We don't invite them along. Maybe she wants to tag along to work, or she wants to like see what you do. And then we're like, no, we can't go to work because all you want to do is have fun. We have to work. Or maybe it's true that she would find it boring. She's not very exciting for her, but then we make time for her to be spontaneous and for her to have fun and to have outlets for who she really is. That's why we're looking at the discernment between how the inner critic or the inner child is feeling and what it's actually needing. There are actually very similar needs that both of the inner critic and the child is actually trying to get. So there's no conflict at that level. The conflict is the way that they're trying to go about doing it. So the inner critic tries to do it through rigidity and harshness and setting a lot of rules and not allowing a kind of natural expression of the child, right? And then the inner child is just, I'm just going to do whatever I want. Go screw yourself. I don't care about rules, right? So we have to work on integrating the two. The inner critic is like the head and the inner child is like the heart. And so what we're doing is bringing the head and the heart in a little bit more harmony. Because right now, a lot of times the head will abuse the heart. Say, you don't matter. You don't have anything good to offer. If we listen to you, then we're just going to be all over the place. The head has a lot of concepts about that. So it's about integration. For instance, right now, I feel a real kind of sensitivity and a tenderness and a very sweet kind of love for your inner children. I don't necessarily feel like there's an inner child in me doing that, but that was part of my inner child that wasn't allowed to be because I grew up needing to be harsh, needing to be competitive, needing to be seen as accomplished. The inner critic would never allow my inner child to have a kind of sensitivity or softness. You see the difference? But after having done this work, there's a softness, there's a gentleness that I'm allowed to have that's part of who I am. And then I also have the sense of responsibility of the inner critic. And it's more integrated because they had a chance to talk and work it out. And every time that we do that, we have the inner child accessible, the sensitivity, the aliveness, the contact, the enthusiasm. When the inner child is present, there's a in touchness, like a contact with yourself. The quality of presence when we're in contact with the inner child, when they have space, when we're not judging them and evaluating them and pushing them away. It's a kind of sweetness. So I hope you can feel that there's that possibility. They're very precious, our inner children, the most precious part of you.